Today's text comes from the prophet Nehemiah, chapter 9, verses 6 through 15. In your pew Bible, it is on page 380. Nehemiah chapter 9, verses 6 through 15. And Ezra said, "You are the Lord, you alone. You have made heaven, the heaven of heavens, with all their hosts, the earth and all that is in it, the seas and all that is in them. To all of them you give life, and the host of heaven worships you. You are the Lord, the God who chose Abram and brought him out of Ur of the Chaldeans and gave him the name Abraham. And you found his heart faithful before you and made him a covenant to give his descendants the land of the Canaanite, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Perizzite, the Jebusites, and the Girgashites. And you have fulfilled your promise, for you are righteous. And you saw the distress of our ancestors in Egypt and heard their cry at the Red Sea. You performed signs and wonders against Pharaoh and all his servants and all the people of his land, for you knew that they acted insolently against our ancestors. You made a name for yourself, which remains to this day. And you divided the sea before them so that they passed through the sea on dry land. But you threw their pursuers into the depths like a stone in mighty waters. Moreover, you led them by day with a pillar of cloud and by night with a pillar of fire, to give them light on the way in which they should go. You came down upon Mount Sinai and spoke with them from heaven and gave them ordinances and true laws, good statutes and commandments. And you made known your holy Sabbath to them and gave them commandments and statutes and a law through your servant Moses. For their hunger you gave them bread from heaven, and for their thirst you brought water for them out of a rock. And you told them to go in and possess the land you swore to give to them." The word of the Lord. A couple of weeks ago, we were talking about Ezra, talking about how Ezra had come back from exile and saw that the walls of the temple were destroyed. The foundations of the city were done. There was a need to rebuild. Now in Nehemiah and Ezra go hand in hand. Nehemiah is looking at the work that has been done. Nehemiah is looking at the people returning from exile. Nehemiah is looking and seeing that they have completed the walls that were destroyed. They have been reconstructed, rebuilt. He's looking at the temple, and it's continuing to be restructured, renewed, and rebuilt. The people of God are coming back to what was. Though these people that return are people that are coming after 50 to 70 years of exile. So as you can imagine, the generation that was taken is not the same generation that's returning. It's a different time in the same place. It's a different people who have not known what it is to live in Jerusalem, but have heard the stories, have heard and understood the things that were, but are now bringing new ideas and new thoughts and what things they should do. So here in this text, we see that Ezra is bringing before the people and bringing the people together to worship the Lord. The people are called upon to mourn for the losses that were done, that were made. All the things that they had done when they forgot God, when they had turned their back on God, when they were taken into exile, not because God lost. As often was the case, it was believed that if your country lost to another, their God was stronger than your God. That's why you were overtaken. But in this case, God allowed them to be taken so that they can repent and come back to their beliefs, to remember that God is in control. And that's what happened to the next generation that returned. It was a new generation of people who rebuilt, who restructured, who renewed the walls of Jerusalem, the walls of the temple, the altar of the temple. But it wasn't just a case of coming in and doing something new. It was time for them to come before the Lord and confess what had been done. Confess their sins before the Lord, their sins as individuals, their sins as a community, their sins as a people. They come and confess even the sins of their ancestors who had forgotten God. They come and they confess that they had forgotten God. This, in many ways, is called the second Exodus because God was bringing them from captivity into the land of freedom. And Ezra brings that point really to the forefront when he says, you brought them out of Egypt. The struggle and the slavery they suffered in Egypt, they were freed by you. They came to the Red Sea with an army behind and a sea before, and you opened the way. The journey that opened before them when the Red Sea opened, it wasn't the promised land, though. It was the journey through the wilderness. And I thought that was an interesting perspective. Too often when we think about the Red Sea and we think about the encouraging story of God opening the Red Sea before the people, we think that God opened the way and then once they crossed over, they were there. But the reality is that when they crossed over to the other side, they crossed over to the beginning of their journey, because the journey still took them through the wilderness. Ezra is reminding them that though they may be returning, it is not as easy as coming home and everything is back to normal, but instead it is a new journey to begin. God may be opening the sea before them, but now is their time to walk through the wilderness. How do we apply this to our lives? How do we see this in our life? Too often on Facebook and on Instagram and things of that nature, you see people comment or pictures that say, if you agree that this nation needs to turn back to God, then like or share this picture. And people share it and they send it out and say, yes, we must turn back to God. But what are we turning back to? Too often I think that when we think about turning back to God, what are we thinking? Are we thinking about the days when after World War II, when everything was pristine and nice and everything was, people were leaving the cities and going to the suburbs and everyone looked the same? I wonder. Are we talking about when there were days when everybody on Sundays went to church because that's what you did? Are we talking about the days when people just came to church just to be, it was the community social center of the town, of the community, of the neighborhood? What do they mean when they say we need to turn back to God? For me, I don't think it's a case of turning back, but instead it's a case and a matter of looking forward to God. Too often we turn around and remember what was and wish that it can be like that again, but we live in a different time, in a different era, different generation, and we cannot expect things to be the same. For many who have been here for a long time can remember a time when this place was full to the rafters. 200 people, incredible community. But there was something that happened along the journey that has brought us to here, where we are today. Our foundation may be solid, and God may be continuing to strengthen those who are here, but something happened along the way. When you turn back, do you turn back and forget about the lessons that have been learned that have brought you to this point? When you turn back, do you forget about the hardships that brought you to your present moment? When you turn back, do you look at what was and hope to live in that again so that you won't grow as you have grown to this moment? When you look back and hope, are you just living in an idealized yesterday? Because too often, when we remember things, we remember the good moments. We kind of forget or ignore those moments that were not so good. We idealize what it was like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. When I think back to my days in the Bronx with the youth fraternity, I think about all the good times we had and all the laughs and all the time that we spent together. And I kind of idealized that. That's what it was. What I forget is that when you put a bunch of city kids in a place together, guess there's not always going to be peace and harmony. And there wasn't always peace and harmony. You put a bunch of teenage city kids who are used to being rough and used to being treated a certain way, and you bring them together, there's going to be moments of difficulty. And we had those moments. But those aren't the moments that I remember. Those aren't the moments that I wish for when I think about those days. It is the moments of laughter, the moments of bowling and the things that we did together. Are we doing that with our lives? Are we saying, let us turn back to God, forgetting that it wasn't as ideal as we thought it was? For the people here, they didn't realize, or they're forgetting, that they went into exile for a reason. They forgot about God. When they're turning back to God, are they going to remember the lessons of forgetting God and being exiled? Or will they once again repeat the same mistakes again? As we spoke about earlier, forgiveness is important. But we always want to forgive and forget, but forgetting is difficult because it means that we might make the same mistakes again. It's about forgiveness and moving forward. When we think about God, we shouldn't think about turning back to God. When we say that people should turn back to God, we shouldn't say that. Instead, we should encourage people to move forward into God, into what God has for you, into where God is taking you, into all that God has for you. Because though your life at this moment may be chaotic and everything may be changing and everything feels like it's falling apart, we still move forward into the presence of God, into what God is calling us, rather than looking back and saying, oh, I remember and wish. Maybe it's time we start looking forward and saying, I see new hope. I can imagine what's to come, or I anticipate the blessings that God has for us. We didn't come here by mistake. We didn't get to this moment by accident. God has brought us to this time and to this place. God has guided this place, these people, each and every one of you to be here right now, so that we together can begin to move forward into God. Will we make mistakes? Of course we will. Is everything going to be perfect? It definitely won't be. But we must keep God at the forefront. Keep God at the fore so that we can move forward with God. As Ezra reminds them, when the people were going through the desert, by day God had a pillar of smoke that all can see and all can walk towards. At night, God had a pillar of fire that lit up the night sky, and they continued to move forward because of that. In this day, as we move forward into the presence of God, towards where God is calling us, I pray that God would be our pillar of smoke by day so that we can walk the journey and continue the paces towards God. May God be our pillar of fire by night that keeps us focused and moving regardless of what's happening around us. Even if we stumble, may we keep our eyes on the pillar of smoke and the pillar of fire as we move forward into the presence of God. It's not time to look back anymore. It's time to move forward into the Lord. It's time to stop thinking about the idealized what was and look into what can be, because God is the guide, the strength, and the inspiration that is taking us to that tomorrow. Amen.